Hello, I'm R.A. Spratt. I write and perform this podcast. If you'd like to support the show, I'm a children's author, so you can buy a book by me, or you can buy me a coffee by going to buymeacoffee.com/storiesrasprat. It's an easy way to make a small thank you gift to the show so I can keep kicking this can down the road. The podcast directory you're using right now should have a link to my Buy Me a Coffee page in the show notes, or you can type it into your browser. That's buymeacoffee.com/storiesrasprat. All contributions are gratefully appreciated. Hello and welcome to Bedtime Stories with me, R.A. Spratt. Well, it's a big week here because my new book, The Epically Awesome Odyssey, as told by Nanny Piggins, has finally officially gone on sale in bookstores across Australia. So it's out there in stores just in time because the movie, the big Hollywood movie for, not of my book, but of The Odyssey is coming out in the next few weeks. So my version, as told by Nanny Piggins, is now also out there. So you can buy your own copy. So to celebrate that today on the podcast, because the audiobook and the ebook are also coming out simultaneously today. So the lovely producers of the audiobook at Penguin have given me a recording of the audiobook, which is the dedication. There's a little paragraph of the backstory of all the Nanny Piggins characters and how I came to write this book, and then the first chapter of the book. So that's going to be today's episode. You may have heard the first chapter before, back when I did it on the podcast, but it's all been fixed up by editors and recorded beautifully by the sound technicians at Penguin Random House Australia. So yeah, check out this version, and there's the extra bits at the beginning as well. I hope you enjoy it. Here we go. To Homer for writing down this story in the first place, and to Xena Warrior Princess for demonstrating just how silly a retelling of Greek mythology can be. I am proud to be part of the 3,000-year tradition of retelling, reimagining, and outrageously embellishing these great epic tales. Writers throughout time have borrowed from Homer, including Shakespeare, Dante, James Joyce, Margaret Atwood, and even the writers of Marvel movies. I am grateful to have had my turn to tell the stories of Greek mythology, and this time from a pig's perspective. The voices of staggeringly beautiful pigs often go unheard of in the history books. With the aid of Nanny Piggins, finally, in this book, I was able to redress that great historical omission. The backstory. This book is the story of The Odyssey, as told by Nanny Piggins. Now, my publisher is a penguin, and therefore a little timid. If you don't believe me, look at the graphic of this audiobook. There's a picture of her there in an orange oval in the corner. Anyway, she is worried that you, the listener, will have no idea who Nanny Piggins is. I rolled my eyes at this suggestion. She's called Nanny Piggins, and she's a nanny who is a pig. It's all pretty self-explanatory. You're an intelligent young person. Of course, you could have figured that out for yourself. But, as is so often annoyingly the case, I could see that my publisher, again imagine a worried penguin sitting at a desk, was probably right. It's always so irritating when other people are right, because, by extension, that can often mean that you, in this case me, are wrong. So, I will be a good author and obey my orange penguin overlord and fill you in on a little of the backstory. Derek, Samantha, and Michael Green were the luckiest children in the world. Their mother had disappeared in a boating accident several years earlier. Obviously, this was not lucky. In fact, it is as unlucky as you can possibly get. But because their mother was missing, their father had to hire a nanny, and Nanny Piggins had applied for the job. No human was interested because Mr. Green only paid 10 cents an hour. Whereas Nanny Piggins was a flying pig who used to be blasted out of a cannon 7 times a night at the circus. And the ringmaster didn't believe in paying his staff anything at all, so Nanny Piggins thought that the 10 cents Mr. Green was offering was a wonderful pay rise, and she was very happy to take on the job. She was sure that looking after 3 children would be a lot easier than being blasted out of a cannon. The Green children soon realised they had the best nanny in the entire world. Aside from being an impossibly glamorous circus star, Nanny Piggins also believed it was perfectly reasonable to serve chocolate for all 9 meals of the day. That was another wonderful thing about her. She believed there were 9 meals in the day. Breakfast, second breakfast, 11sies, lunch, second lunch, afternoon tea, dinner, second dinner, and midnight snacksies. Nanny Piggins and the children had wonderful adventures on a daily basis. For further information, you can read about them in The Adventures of Nanny Piggins. But at the end of each of these days, and sometimes in the middle of the days too, Nanny Piggins would often tell the children stories, and that is where this book comes in. Because this book is her account of the Odyssey, a tale from ancient Greek mythology that is so long and wonderful she had to break it up into episodes to tell it to the children over many days. I hope that answers your questions. Now you can sit back and enjoy listening to this book. If it hasn't answered your questions, don't worry, just start listening. Stories should be enjoyed. Just let it wash over you. It all happened 3,000 years ago. There are no facts, just memories, and memories can be very malleable. It's better to just enjoy them than to think about them too much. P.S. I forgot to mention Boris. Boris is Nanny Piggins' brother. He is a 10-foot-tall, 700-kilogram ballet dancing bear from Russia. He missed his sister dreadfully when she ran away from the circus, so he ran away too, and now lives in Mr. Green's garden shed. Mr. Green has not noticed this. He is not a very observant man. Boris is very in touch with his emotions and prone to weeping, but that's okay. Boris is so in touch with his emotions, it means that everyone in his vicinity can leave him to handle all the weeping for them as well. 1. Odysseus. Nanny Piggins, what's an Odyssey? Asked Michael. Why do you ask, my dear boy? Asked Nanny Piggins. They're not trying to teach you spelling again at school, are they? If they are, I'll be very cross about it. I was planning to teach you how to bake a really good chocolate brioche tomorrow. How can I do that if your brain is tying itself in knots trying to remember what order to put letters in? Oh, no, it's nothing that serious, said Michael. It's just that I was talking to the bus driver this morning on the way to school. Were you asking him how he came to have such a wonderful job? Interrupted Nanny Piggins. It's so much power and responsibility to drive a 10-ton bus around. There are so many possibilities. Just think how many chocolate bars you could fit in a bus. It would be hundreds of thousands, possibly millions. Where would the children sit? Asked Samantha. I suppose the children could be allowed to sit inside the bus too, said Nanny Piggins. Children don't take up that much space. Although they'd have to be prepared to put several thousand chocolate bars on their laps. And they'd have to learn how to use scuba gear because there would be so many chocolate bars inside the bus that it'd be very difficult to breathe otherwise. We wouldn't want anyone to stop breathing, said Boris. No, agreed Nanny Piggins. For safety's sake, I really think it would be easier if the children sat on top of the bus. Although that would be a waste of chocolate storage space, and we can't have that. So, on balance, it would be better if the children walked. I would drive the chocolate on ahead, unload it, and then come back for them. No, we didn't talk about that, said Michael. He wasn't sure how the conversation had turned to scuba gear, but he wanted to get it back on track. The bus driver was saying that every time you catch the bus with us to school, and the whole busload of children end up being delivered to the school 3 hours late, his manager at the depot never believes him when he says that a fabulously glamorous pig hijacked the bus and took all the passengers on an epic odyssey. He seems very sad about it, so I was wondering, what's an odyssey? Oh, odyssey is just a word for a journey, said Nanny Piggins. But a particular type of journey, one that is long and complicated, with lots of strange things happening, often involving monsters. Oh, that makes sense, said Samantha. The bus driver did think it was strange when you made him drive to the Slimbridge cake factory, because a worker on the jam-filling line had tipped you off that they were baking double fudge brownies. And the truancy officer was monstrously angry when she chased you down the motorway with her siren blaring, said Michael. I know, said Nanny Piggins. Who ever allowed a truancy officer to have a siren? The police sergeant lent it to her, said Derek, because she kept getting in traffic accidents when she was chasing you. The word Odyssey actually comes from the name of a great Greek hero called Odysseus, said Nanny Piggins. Wow, that's cool, said Michael, to have a word made out of your name. I know, said Nanny Piggins. The people at the Oxford English Dictionary have been badgering me for years to allow them to change the word glamorous to Nanny Piggins, but I refuse to allow it. Why? Asked Michael. You are glamorous. Exactly, that's why, said Nanny Piggins. If my name became the word for glamorous, then there'd be no word to describe me. At the moment, I'm referred to as the world's most glamorous flying pig. But if I allowed the Oxford English Dictionary to have their way, I'd have to be the world's most Nanny Piggins flying pig, and that wouldn't make any sense at all. Right, said Michael. This explanation made no sense at all to him, but he didn't think an explanation of the explanation would help. So who was Odysseus? Asked Derek. What did he do that made him so famous they named a word after him? Odysseus was unlike the other Greek heroes you've heard about, said Nanny Piggins. When you think of Greek heroes, you think of Hercules, Jason, and Achilles. They're big, strong men who are good at rushing into incredibly dangerous situations and fighting with whatever people or monsters that needed to be fought with. Yes, said Derek, Greek mythology was full of them. Odysseus was different, said Nanny Piggins. Odysseus was really brave and good at fighting, but also cunning and good at coming up with clever plans, as well as being very charming and persuasive. Odysseus does sound more complicated and interesting, said Samantha. But that shouldn't be a surprise, said Nanny Piggins, because she was, after all, a Piggins. What? Said Derek. Are you saying that Odysseus, the Greek hero so famous that the word Odyssey was named after them, was a pig? And a woman? Asked Samantha. But of course, said Nanny Piggins. Odysseus was the only person in the entire Trojan army who, after 10 years of fighting, had the idea that, instead of going out into a field and trying to kill each other every day, they could hide inside a wooden horse, trick the Trojans into letting them into their city, and end the war in one night. It was a stroke of military strategy so brilliant that people still talk about it 3,000 years later. So, of course, she was a Piggins. She came up with the idea of the Trojan horse, asked Samantha. Indeed, said Nanny Piggins, and that was just the beginning. She also took a journey so epic and amazing that people have used her name to describe epic, amazing journeys ever since, which is exactly the type of thing my spectacular relatives do all the time. It actually makes more sense, said Michael. For a person to do all that would be unbelievable, but for a Piggins, it would simply be a regular day-to-day activity. You're going to have to tell us the whole story, said Derek. All right, I will, said Nanny Piggins. But first, let's whip up some baklava. It's so important to eat geographically appropriate snacks when you listen to stories. If I'm going to tell you an epic Greek tale, I'll need an epic amount of honey pastries. And so, 45 minutes and several dozen trays of baklava later, Nanny Piggins began her tale. Before I tell you about Odysseus's Odyssey, I must tell you about Odysseus. You have to understand her to understand how she felt when her famous journey began. The first ever Odyssey was all about her journey home from the Trojan War. Now, you have to realize that the Trojan War took 10 years, and the things that went on in that time were more melodramatic than an entire series of The Young and the Irritable. Note, The Young and the Irritable was Nanny Piggins' favourite television program. It was a soap opera so eventful, it was not uncommon for characters to get married, go missing at sea, come back as their own twin, lead a South American country to revolution, and get married again to their first spouse's twin, all in one episode. Is that possible? Asked Boris. Oh, yes, said Nanny Piggins. If Homer had written daytime soap operas, he would have had plenty of material. The Greek soldiers were forever fighting about who was going to fight first, squabbling over who was going to wear whose armour, and sulking over who got to kidnap who. But to understand Odysseus, we need to go back even further than that. Because you need to understand that Odysseus never wanted to fight in the Trojan War in the first place. Why not? Asked Samantha. Because Odysseus was happily married to Penelope, and they had a son called Telemachus. Oh, that's nice, said Samantha. Isn't Penelope a girl's name? Asked Michael. No, said Nanny Piggins. Yes, it is, said Michael. Were you around in the ancient Greek story days? Demanded Nanny Piggins. Do you know how all the names worked back then? Sammy, Joe, Robin, Billy. These are all boys' and girls' names. The ancient Greeks did all sorts of strange things, like marry cloud nymphs and hold up the sky with their backs and walk into the afterlife playing a lute. Who knows what they had in mind when they were naming their children? That's not important. All you need to know is that Odysseus loved Penelope and their son Telemachus. Okay, said Derek. If you say so, said Michael. So, the Trojan War kicked off when two goddesses forced a shepherd called Paris to judge a beauty contest, and then they both tried to bribe him to pick them. Athena promised Paris if he voted for her, he could marry the most beautiful woman on earth. So, of course, Paris voted for Athena. Who was the most beautiful woman on earth at the time? Asked Samantha. Helen, the Queen of Sparta, replied Nanny Piggins. So Paris ran off with her. The problem was the Queen of Sparta was already married to the King of Sparta, and he got very angry about it, so he declared war. Running off with a queen is very naughty, said Samantha. Yes, and war is a serious business, explained Nanny Piggins. War seems glamorous in the movies, although in the ancient story days they didn't have movies, but they did have poems, which were a lot more action-packed and exciting than poetry is today. And these poems made war sound really glamorous. The children tried to imagine this. The poetry they had been taught at school had involved wandering as lonely as a cloud and looking at daffodils, which had not been exciting at all. But in reality, continued Nanny Piggins, war is not fun. In a real war, there's a lot of waiting, there's a lot of bad food, a lot of unsatisfactory toilet facilities, and a lot of sitting around in open areas getting sunburnt. And that's before the fighting begins. It sounds very tiring, said Boris. Indeed, agreed Nanny Piggins. Once that starts, war gets even worse. Obviously, getting stabbed with a sword is deeply unpleasant, and dying is even more awful. But even just running around in armour, wrestling with people and hacking at people, trying to chop their heads off, is exhausting. You know how you feel after your school brutally forces you to run the cross-country. Awful, said Michael. Exhausted, said Derek. My legs get all achy, said Samantha. Well, fighting wars is just like that, said Nanny Piggins. It's like doing the worst ever cardio class at the gym. It's like doing a spin class on a bicycle, a pump class with weights, and an aerobics class with jumping around all at the same time, and for no good reason. Yuck, said Michael. Only it's not just instructors yelling at you to keep going and try harder, continued Nanny Piggins. It's also enemies yelling that they're going to kill you if you don't try harder. So there is a lot of motivation to make it a really unpleasant workout. Oh, how horrible, said Boris. Everyone in ancient Greece knew that Odysseus was super brave, athletic and cunning, which is just the type of person you want when you're heading off to war. Also, Odysseus was the queen of Ithaca, so she had 550 soldiers and 12 boats she could bring along. The king of Sparta needed all the help he could get, so he sent Palamedes to recruit her to his side. But Odysseus heard that Palamedes was coming. She did not want to be recruited. She wanted to stay at home, playing with the baby, being in love with her husband, and running the farm. That does sound nicer, agreed Michael. So Odysseus came up with a cunning plan. Obviously, she couldn't refuse to go to war. That would be un-Greek of her. Also, she didn't want to offend the king of Sparta when he was already so upset about his wife, the most beautiful woman in the world, running off. Instead of saying no, Odysseus decided to pretend to be insane. That way Palamedes would uninvite her. That doesn't sound very ethical, said Derek. No, agreed Nanny Piggins. But to be fair, Odysseus didn't feel she had to be ethical when dealing with a person who was trying to manipulate her into sailing to another country and stabbing a bunch of people she'd never met before. Fair enough, said Derek. Obviously, Odysseus did think Paris was very naughty for stealing Helen, but she strongly suspected that the king of Sparta had not been a lot of fun to be married to, and probably had himself to blame that his wife was so easy to persuade to allow herself to be kidnapped. Love is so complicated, said Boris. Unless it's love for honey, then it's very simple. Yes, well, this was definitely the complicated kind, said Nanny Piggins. Odysseus did not want to be involved, so when Palamedes turned up, she feigned insanity. How? Asked Samantha. Did she see a medical professional and get a clinical diagnosis? Asked Derek. Oh, goodness no, said Nanny Piggins. This was the ancient Greek story days. That's not how insanity was established back then. No, it was all much more theatrical. Husband, said Odysseus, I have a cunning plan. Really, said Penelope. What is it this time? To convince Palamedes that I am insane, I shall take my plough, and instead of harnessing 2 horses or 2 bullocks to it, I shall harness 1 horse and 1 bullock. Really, said Penelope, and that is a cunning plan? Oh, yes, said Odysseus, because if I harness a horse and a bullock, they shall move at different speeds and with different strength, so the plough won't go straight, it will turn around in circles. And you think that will convince Palamedes you are mad? Asked Penelope. That's just the start, said Odysseus. Also, instead of planting seeds, I shall sow salt into the earth. But if you sow salt into the earth, you shall ruin it, so that nothing will ever grow there again, said Penelope. Exactly, exclaimed Odysseus. Only a mad person would do that, which is why it is such a brilliant plan. Okay, said Penelope. If nothing else, the fact that you think this is a brilliant plan clearly shows you are mad, so it will most likely work. And that is what Odysseus did. When Palamedes arrived the following morning, it was to discover Odysseus ploughing her fields with a horse and bullock, going around and around in squiggly circles while she sowed salt into the soil. Are you all right there, Odysseus? Called Palamedes. Absolutely tickety-boo, said Odysseus happily. I'm planting a fine crop of salt here on my land. You do realize that salt will ruin land for 100 years, called Palamedes. Oh, no, said Odysseus. I shall grow a fine crop of salt, so my family can eat nothing but salt for the rest of their days. You do realize that if they only eat salt, your family will soon die, asked Palamedes. Then it shall be all the easier for me to feed them for the rest of their days, said Odysseus with a grin. You know, said Palamedes, talking quietly with Penelope, the king of Sparta is aware that Odysseus has a reputation for cunning and brilliance. Really? Said Penelope. Yes, in fact, the king warned me that Odysseus may try to trick me so she wouldn't have to come to war, said Palamedes. Surely if someone is that despicable and devious, you wouldn't want them to fight with you in a war, said Penelope. If someone is that despicable and devious, said Palamedes, that is exactly who we want to be fighting with us in a war, because war is a nasty business, so the more despicable people on our side, the better. We would rather you let Odysseus stay here, said Penelope. To ruin your field with salt, asked Palamedes. She may stop doing that as soon as you leave the district, admitted Penelope. I thought as much, said Palamedes. I'm afraid I shall now have to commandeer your baby. What? Said Samantha. How do you commandeer a baby? Asked Derek. If you let me continue the story, you'll soon find out, said Nanny Piggins. Palamedes snatched up little baby Telemachus and took him out into the centre of the field. Odysseus was careening all over the place, ploughing in circles, when she noticed her baby son was right in front of her. She was horrified. She tightened her grip on the plough reins and wrangled her horse and bullock to pull together, veering away from the baby at the last moment so that little Telemachus was unharmed. Phew, said Samantha, what a relief. But in doing so, said Nanny Piggins, Odysseus proved her sanity. Oh dear, said Michael. Palamedes was triumphant. "I knew you weren't insane," he crowed. "In fact, that you would go to such lengths to avoid war shows you are actually the sanest hero in all of Greece." "Curse my brilliant brilliance," said Odysseus, realizing that the jig was up. And so Odysseus had no choice. She swore her allegiance to the Spartan king and set sail with the rest of the Greek army. "And the journey to Troy was her Odyssey?" asked Michael. "Oh, no," said Nanny Piggins. "The Odyssey didn't come for another 10 years. That's just the backstory, giving you an insight into her character and motivation." "It's a very traumatizing backstory with all the attempted violence towards babies," said Samantha. "I know," said Nanny Piggins. "That's how the ancient Greeks liked their poems, full of violence and mistreatment of children, which may go a long way to explaining why poetry was so much more popular then than it is now. Anywho, that was Odysseus, a pig so clever and extraordinary a noun was named after her. Her actual Odyssey was so epic that it would take me days and days to tell you about it." "OK," said Derek. "We're up for that." "But you have to go to school tomorrow," said Nanny Piggins. "You don't approve of school," Derek argued. "You say it's not educational." "But sometimes I need you to go to school," said Nanny Piggins, "so I have time to prepare my own lesson plans." "You mean buying cake ingredients?" said Samantha. "Yes, I do," said Nanny Piggins. "I'll make a deal with you. If you go to school tomorrow, I will get all the ingredients to make a rose-water tea cake. Then, when you come home, I will tell you the story of Odysseus and the Lotus Eaters." "Deal!" exclaimed the children. They weren't sure what a rose-water tea cake was, but if it was a cake and Nanny Piggins made it, they were sure it would be delicious. And so Derek, Samantha and Michael went to bed, wondering what on earth a lotus eater could be, and hardly able to wait to hear the next installment of Odysseus's epic journey. The end. Time for bed. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that one. It's fun for me to listen back to the audiobook recording as well, because I'm editing my own podcasts all the time. And when I hear the audiobook version, it's always funny because they get me to talk a little bit slower when I do audiobooks. And I always start the day talking slowly. And this would have been recorded at the start of the day because it's the first chapter. And then I start to accelerate and they're like, slow down, slow down. So the audiobooks, they do make me behave a little bit more professionally when I do those. Anyway, so if you enjoyed that first chapter and you want to buy a copy of the physical paperback book, or you want to get the audiobook or the ebook, they're all available from today, from when this podcast drops. And if you're overseas and you're having a hard time getting hold of copies of these things, then you can always contact an Australian online bookstore, thenile.com.au. They ship internationally. That's an Australian bookstore. So that's thenile.com.au. I'll put a link in the show notes. Or you can even, if you'd like a signed copy, email my local bookstore, the Bookshop Bowral. I'll put a link for that in the notes too, and they'll post a signed copy to you. So that's it. All right. I hope you enjoyed that. And next week when we come back, I've already written next week's episode. Next week it's going to be it's going to be from the beginning of the Trojan War. Well, it's actually not from the beginning. 9 years into the Trojan War, when Achilles has a huge sulky temper tantrum, and all of a sudden everything starts happening at once. All right. Until next time. Goodbye. Hello, it's me again. If you enjoyed listening to Bedtime Stories with R.A. Spratt, it would be really helpful if you could like, subscribe, follow, and or review the show on whatever podcast platform you're listening to now. Every little one of those digital affirmations helps, and the bigger this podcast gets, the more I can justify procrastinating from my real job to keep bringing these stories to you. Thank you.